leaders of local. Lots of us have our own organizations or belong to organizations that are all about promoting the buy local message within our communities. So I'm going to ask everyone, if possible, if they can turn on their video and their audio for just a moment, because we are going to just have a lightning round of introductions, just so we can get a sense of who all we have. And once we do that, I'm going to turn it over to Derek, and we will go from there. So I am going to call on you as I go through, and actually maybe we can stay muted until I call on you would be good. Let's see, I've got our speakers here, so we'll get to them in just a minute. Rebecca and Austin, you are the first to appear on my screen. So if you can just say your name, your organization, and what city it's in, if it doesn't say that. And let's just say maybe how long your organization has been around. Let's do that.
I'll be super quick. Rebecca Melançon. I am on the board of Amoeba, so I'm here representing Amoeba. I'm in Austin, Texas, but I also was the founder and executive director of AIBA, the Austin Independent Business Alliance, for 20 years. So
awesome. Great. Thanks, Rebecca. Next is Michael Svante. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, but if you can unmute yourself and just introduce yourself real quick.
Sure, it's French, so it's a silent E, but it's Michael Savant. I'm the executive director of an organization called National Commonwealth Group. We're an economic development think tank, and folks, if they're interested in seeing what we've been doing, go to scf.green. But we've been in existence since 1999. I'm a 40+ year entrepreneur out of Silicon Valley.
Okay, awesome. We're just getting a little taste of everybody around here, so we can just get a sense, and it's nice that we can get better for future conversations. So let's see, Karen Sawitz.
You got it. You did an excellent job. Thank you.
Yay.
My organization is a 74-year-old free community paper in Albion, New York, which is associated between Buffalo and Rochester, New York, and Western New York. I'm on the board for Free Community Papers of New York State, a previous board member for Association of Free Community Papers for over 20 years. So, and I'm a small business owner in a small rural community.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us, Karen. Kurt Morrow, let's hear from you.
I'm Kurt Morrow. I'm from Lextra, and we're a 3-year-old organization. We do coalition loyalty and customer sharing platform. I'm presently locked down in Dayton, Ohio. I'm from Miami Beach, and we're launching in Madison, Wisconsin, in alignment with Dane County Buy Local.
Great. Well, thank you, Kurt. Thanks for being here. Wyatt Ball, would you unmute and just say hello?
Sure. Hey, I'm Wyatt Ball. I am the business development manager at Low Country Local First, a 501c3 nonprofit in Charleston, South Carolina. And it's great to see you all. So happy to be here.
Thanks for coming. Let's have Barbara Bonner-Stevens.
Hi, I'm Barbara Bonner-Stevens. I'm the regional director for the Oklahoma Small Business Development Center. Our state office is located in Durant, but I'm working from home in Colgate. So we're just north of actually we're closer to Dallas-Fort Worth than we are to Oklahoma City. And we've been around about, I think, over 30 years in Oklahoma.
Awesome. Well, nice to meet you. Let's see, Ivo Thorbus, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I'm so sorry. If you want to unmute and tell me.
Yeah, you got it right. It's Ebo. It's
okay.
Pronounced as though it was EBO. I'm an independent blogger and connected to an organization that basically follows my work known as the Peace Process Research Group. And I focus primarily on issues that show up as systemic, the ones that call us to looking at seriously how to change the system so that we don't sustain ourselves as self-destructive. And I think
a very deep topic.
Yeah, and so the issue of concern that you've described, I think, is essential to that. So that's why I'm here.
Yep, community banking. It underlies a lot. Well, let's go on to Andrew Connor.
Hi, I'm Andrew Connor. I am the founder and director of the Center for Community Ownership, which is an organization that's about a year and a half, 2 years old now, helping communities start and save essential businesses using community-owned businesses, for-profit businesses that are capitalized with investment crowdfunding. And I am based in Missoula, Montana.
Excellent. All right, we have so many great folks here. Bob Giordano.
Yeah, I'm located here in Westchester County in the town of Yorktown. I'm the founder of the Yorktown Small Business Association. We were founded around 6 years ago, and it was following a big battle to stop a Costco, which took 7 years, but we were successful. And so we started the Yorktown Small Business Association in 2014 in order to advocate, advise, and mentor local independent small businesses here.
Well, thanks for coming today. We appreciate it. Let's see, I know I've got a few more people to go through, but I don't want to take too much time. So let's see, Tracy Berman, do you want to say real quick where you're from? What's your organization? Unmute.
Hi, yes, thank you. Finding the button is difficult. I'm Tracy Furman. I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm the executive director for Triad Local First, which is a nonprofit that supports independently owned small businesses in the Triad area. So,
excellent. Well, thanks for coming today. There are quite a few without video, but let's see. I'm going to call on, let's see, Eric Nolan. I don't think we've heard from you yet.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Eric Nolan. I am in the city of Flagstaff. I'm on our planning and zoning commission, and I'm also running for city council. And especially because our community is susceptible to economic flows, I'm very curious how community banking can work.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being here. Let's see, Kevin O'Meara. We don't have video, but you might be able to talk to us.
Well, I don't know if my microphone's on.
It is.
Oh, good.
I hear you.
Yeah, I'm from Manchester, New Hampshire. And I have a little organization called Neighborhood Merchant Alliance, and we follow the local first strategy.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Let's see. I don't know if Wyatt Ball wants to unmute and say hello.
Yeah, I already spoke, so it's
oh,
okay.
Wait.
Yep.
Sorry about that. I'm losing track of all my squares here. Kalanos Johnson? I may be mispronouncing that.
No, that's right. No, good afternoon. Kalanos Johnson here in city of Fairburn, Georgia, Director of Economic Development for Fairburn. Fairburn is in South Fulton County, Metro Atlanta.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming today. Let's see, we got 2 or 3 more here. Paul Carnicelli.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm a founder of a small software business, been in IT for 35 years. I left corporate sector about 4 years ago, and I'm looking to apply technology, e-commerce in particular, to local small businesses. That's been the defined objective for the company since 2 years now that we formed.
Well, thank you for being here.
And have a customer who wrestled recently with the whole PPP thing.
Oh, yeah. Lots of wrestling going on with that, for sure. Let's see, a couple more here. Tosin?
Okay.
Tosin?
Yeah, hello. Tosin Oshibumi. I'm a community and economic development specialist. I work in Montgomery County in the Community and Economic Development Division. I'm just here to kind of get information because we work with small businesses trying to figure out different ways to help them.
Great. And which state was
in
that?
Dayton, Ohio.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for being here. And then I don't think we've heard from Melinda Gonzalez.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Melinda Gonzalez. I work with Westside Development Corporation. We're a nonprofit in San Antonio, Texas, and we work with small businesses, small Latino-owned small businesses, and we also focus on bringing in new business into the west side of San Antonio.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being here as well. I think I got everybody, but please pipe up if I missed you somehow. I want to thank everybody for being here, and I felt like it was important to hear from everybody. We're experimenting with the format of these calls, so sorry it takes a little time to get around to everybody, but I wanted to try it out that way, see how it goes. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Derek, because Derek is not only our fearless leader of Amoeba, he is also a recovering banker, a former banker. And he's going to talk to us about, kind of the importance of this. And I know that when I was unfamiliar with this work, I really was not familiar with the huge difference that community banking versus large scale mega banks, the huge difference that makes. So Derek, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome everybody to the call. I will try to be brief so we can kind of get back on time. I also have Eric Morse, retired banking executive, who's going to speak for a few minutes. And we also have Thomas Barr, who is the executive director with Local First Arizona, who's also going to speak on community banking. And then we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A. But so as Jennifer stated, I'm executive director of Amoeba, and I have been in this role for less than a year. Actually, it would be a year coming up this July. And my previous background was in economic development, and I focused primarily on attraction projects. So I'm here in Cincinnati, Ohio, and if any of you all are baseball fans, you all would remember that the MLB All-Star Game was here in 2015. And I worked very strongly on that project to get site selectors from all over the country here. Before that, I was in banking for about 5 years. I was an investment advisor, and quit the banking industry right around the 2009 economic downturn. And so that's when all bankers were getting laid off or retiring or getting fired. And many of us went into development work for nonprofits. So that's really kind of how I've gotten here to Amoeba. It's been quite a journey. But just wanted to open up just with a couple of points. Many of you all are familiar with PPP and how that was rolled out. And so we understand that there's been a lot of complications. There's definitely been stories that I've heard of business owners that have been in business for 30 plus years and was not able to get a bank loan. We know that a lot of the independent businesses we serve were also kind of cut out of PPP because they didn't have an existing loan relationship with the corporate bank in their community. And so in understanding and kind of absorbing all of this, we have gotten around, I've had a lot of conversations about doing a bank local campaign. And Eric and I spoke a couple of weeks ago, and he brought up an interesting comment, and it was, if you are passionate about shopping local, you should also be passionate about banking local. Thomas has also raised comments. Thomas is also a member of our board, and he has raised comments about the need to shift dollars into community banks. And so that's why they'll be speaking about that. But just to, we understand that these loans were rolled out and that the U.S. Small Business Administration deputized banks across the country to make these loans. We know that the rollout was chaotic and uneven. Some banks stepped up, but others were mired in bureaucracy and confusion, really leaving applicants in limbo. And so whether a business succeeded in getting a loan really hinged to a significant degree on its location. So many more of the PPP loans were made in some states than in others. So what accounts for the difference is the fact that there was a strong correlation between the number of loans issued in a state and the relative strength of that state's small local banks. So if you look at some interesting research put out by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, they actually show graphs of where those loans were made and in the states that they were made in. And so where local community banks constitute a larger share of the market is where a lot of those loans were made. So by contrast, businesses that were located in places where the banking sector is dominated by big banks were much less likely to get relief. And so that's really one of the major points that I wanted to kind of point out before I turn it over to Eric. I do want to apologize. I've been on my second sinus infection this season. And so forgive me if my voice sounds a little bit muffled. But Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Eric, thank you. Let's just talk for a little bit, if we could, about community banking. I've spent probably 40 years in banking. I've worked for large banks. I've worked on Wall Street. Most recently, I worked for a community bank. There is this hierarchy of banks in the United States where our banking landscape is dominated by the very large banks, the most well-known brands in banking. And I don't know any of you well enough, but I wonder if in your own individual efforts, whether any of those really large banks are helping you at all. The point that Derek makes about the PPP, there are countless stories that have been chronicled over the last 30 days about how difficult it's been for many small business owners to take advantage of the program. And they went to their big bank where they bank, and they were essentially shut out because they're not big enough. The way the program works is that banks batch loan applications, and the larger the batch, the greater priority it has to get processed. So there's a natural a tendency within the definition of that program to benefit large banks and large businesses, and conversely to stick it to community banks and real small businesses. And I think that's at the heart of what Derek is talking about. When you think about community banks, most community banks have never made a loan like they had to make in the PPP. They typically make mortgages, or in the more rural parts of our country, they make an agri loans or things like that. This was a brave new world for them, with documentation that they had never seen before and a timeline that they had never operated under before. And I've been a very outspoken advocate of community banking for at least the last decade. I feel the community banks did an extraordinary job responding to the call for help. Could they have done it better? Sure. But I think this is an important first step for them to be able to demonstrate to the community that in many ways they can do many of the things that these large banks do. Further, I believe that if you look at the success of any community, at the financial epicenter of the community is a fully engaged, involved community bank, not Bank of America or some large bank. To the extent that groups like Amoeba and other like-minded people can seek out a community bank, work with them so that they can pick up their game a little bit, but support them, the support that you'll get back is tenfold what you might expect. I'm not authorized to speak for the community bankers of the United States, but I deal with 20 of them here, CEOs here in New England. They suffer from an inferiority complex because for years, the perception has been that if you want good banking services, you'll go to a big bank. And these community banks are lovely places to go through the drive-through, and they'll give you a biscuit for your dog or a lollipop for your kid. But they're not perceived with the same sense of credibility that these large banks have. I think that groups like Amoeba and other groups in the United States have a wonderful opportunity to leave their big banks, go to community banks, and start a very significant movement in this country. Having worked for a large bank, as Derek did, I can tell you, the large banks are so arrogant. They don't believe that this is ever going to happen in the United States, that small business people are going to leave and choose a community bank over their bank. But I can tell you that the bank that I just retired from, in 7 years, we tripled the size of the bank, and this was our underlying strategy, that there's an inextricable link between the financial epicenter and health of a community and an involved community bank. And I think I might just stop there because I'd be interested in what you think, or if you'd like me to head in a different direction. But that's the heart, I think, of my message.
Sure. And we're having a couple of questions pop up. But in efforts of time, Jennifer, do you think we should go to Thomas next and then open it up for Q&A? Or how do you think we're doing on time, Jennifer? You're muted. You're on mute. Jennifer.
Sorry. We are right on time right now. We started a little bit late, but
okay.
So yeah, I think we can have a couple of cute, you know what, Thomas is not going to be very long, so I'd really rather have, I think him speak about kind of how that translates into actions we can take, and then having an overall discussion. But please, I do encourage people to go ahead and type your questions in the chat so you don't forget about them, or write them down, and we'll be circling back to a more open discussion in just a couple minutes. Well, longer than that, Thomas, but.
No problem. Well, thanks so much for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Thomas Barr. I'm the executive director, as Derek said, from Local First Arizona. We provide resources and a voice for small businesses across the entire state of Arizona. We've been an organization since 2003, founded by Kimber Lanning. I've been with the organization since 2013. We represent over 3,000 businesses in our state. So just to carry over from what Eric is saying and to connect that to local economy work and really underscoring equity in local economy work, the importance of where our dollars are deposited and how banks play a critical role in local economies is not something that is new. Dr. Martin Luther King spoke to the importance of depositing dollars into Black-owned banks, and we continue to see the importance of looking at how our dollars are deposited through historic moments in time. We saw it through the Great Recession. We saw it through the Dakota Access Pipeline, and we are seeing it again now through this pandemic in how the banks really operate. Really what we're seeing and what we're feeling right now is not the way the big banks are responding to the moment. It's how the large banks always operate, and now they're under a microscope. So I want to talk to you about some of the work that we've done at Local First Arizona over the last 6 years to excite the community to invest their dollars into local banks and credit unions, and then hopefully have a broader conversation with all of you about how we did that, and then also why that's so important to all of the work that you do at different spaces. So I want to start by saying that Arizona is in a really, really unique position. In 2013, we were the last state to reach pre-economic recovery levels from the Great Recession, the very last state in the country. And one correlating statistic that we looked at was the number of community banks in Arizona. We, at that time, only had 14 community banks in our entire state. If you look at the state of Texas, they have over 400. If you look at the state of Colorado, they have over 300. If you look at North Dakota, they have their own state bank. There are so many better scenarios that allowed other states to reach pre-recession economic recovery levels that could be attributed to how their banking systems are set up in their states. So when we pulled those numbers in 2013, not only did we know that we had only 14 community banks left in our state, but that 97% of Arizona deposits were being put into out-of-state, non-local financial institutions. That's business deposits, city and state government deposits, and individual deposits, all being placed into institutions that had no headquarters in Arizona. So of that 3% in 2013 was only placed in 14 community banks. And the critical difference and why that's so important is that the difference for a small business in applying for a loan and creating a relationship is critically different when they walk into a community bank and when they walk into a big bank. If you're a small business and you walk in and you're filling out an application for a loan, that individual that you are meeting with is not making the decision as to whether or not you are going to get funded. It's going to an underwriter that is very far away, that is not going to get to know your business, that's not going to get to know the history of your business, what you do in the community, your leadership in the community, anything about you. And it's just going to be sent, and they're going to check some boxes, and maybe you'll get approved and maybe you won't. The average loan size of the 3 largest banks in Arizona, Chase, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America, is over $2 million. But we know that the average loan that most small businesses need is actually between $25,000 and $300,000. So when the large banks are loaning out these very high rates and the small businesses don't need those high levels of loans, we know that most of them are not going to get approved. So these are all numbers, these are all things from the FDIC that we looked up that I encourage all of you to look up as well in your states. It's reported every summer how the dollars in your state are deposited. And so we made the active choice at Local First Arizona. If we're going to work to have a thriving small business community and local economy, we have to have a strong infrastructure of local banks and credit unions in our state. You can't have one without the other. So we created and launched an annual aggressive campaign, Move Your Money campaign, to get cities, individuals and families and businesses to move their money to local banks and credit unions. Now, this was a campaign that messaging and information is available all year long, but that we really pushed hard during what is known as Community Banking Month during the month of April. And each year we host events throughout the state that invite business owners in, and we invite the credit unions and the banks to come to meet them, to create relationships, to potentially work with them. And then we host a way that individuals can fill out a form on our website to be introduced personally to a local bank or credit union contact if they're interested in moving their money to that institution. So over the course of that 6 years, it was not only public-facing media work and producing content that educated people about the importance of local financial institutions, but we also worked on the back end with building relationships through city governments and some of our larger businesses in Arizona to move their money as well. So to date, we've worked with the city of Phoenix, the city of Tucson, the city of Tempe, and the city of Mesa to move all of their savings accounts out of the large banks and actually into a local bank in Arizona. And even just with one bank alone, we were able to attribute in just a few years over $10 million in assets from private institutions that were moved over. So the large number and the exciting number that we were able to measure just last summer, as I mentioned, every July, the FDIC reports the new numbers of deposits. That 97% in 2013, in 2019 dropped to 91.75% that was being deposited out of state. So we were able to contribute to successfully moving over almost 6% or so of deposits, 7% of deposits to banks that are actually in Arizona. And those FDIC reports will show you the actual percentages of the banks that have grown assets in your state if you look at those numbers. So 91.75% is a huge difference, but there's still a ton of work to do because small businesses are, if we look at the numbers from the Great Recession to now, the 3 largest banks, Chase, Wells Fargo, B of A, they've all grown in assets at the same time. So while we know that people are hyper aware of this, we saw a huge divestment from Wells Fargo during the Dakota Access Pipeline. It's critical when we think about the resources that small businesses need And when we think about how communities of color are being treated when they walk into local banks and apply for loans, there's research done showing the amount of attention and time put toward small business owners of color is almost cut in half, sometimes up to 80% for Black and brown business owners from the large banks. They will rush them through the process. They will not greet them with a handshake. These are all things that can be addressed and can be worked on when we grow a thriving, strong community banking system in our state. So right now, in response to everything happening with the PPP program, Local First Arizona is gearing up for what we believe to be a huge wave of interest in city governments and businesses to move their money out of the large banks into local banking institutions. And we're working on a new campaign that'll take place in August. And so we're actually prepping and having calls with those local financial institutions right now to make sure that they're ready for what we see as a huge interest in divestment from the large banks. So thank you.
That's wildly impressive. Wildly impressive.
Yeah, Eric, do you have a response or anything else you would like to comment on based on?
That's about the most inspiring story on this subject that I've heard in a while, and it's very obvious that you have an impassioned leader in Arizona who is proactively doing something. I think that's an important ingredient. Regarding the FDIC deposit share data, it's published as of June 30, not published, it's calculated as of June 30th every year. The FDIC usually publishes it 60 or 90 days afterwards. The data itself is very misleading because it doesn't segregate retail deposits from commercial deposits. So you can have a situation where 100 people could go into Chase and close out their personal checking account, and next week Chase could get a new commercial account for the same amount of money or more, and the data doesn't indicate the sorts of things that the story that you just heard tells us. So you've got to take the FDIC deposit share data with a grain of salt, but a movement of that amount in one state on an enormous amount of money is significant. The other thing I would add is this, that every municipality has municipal deposits. And in a general sense, it's my belief that most of those deposits are with the large banks. There are two problems with that. The municipal deposits exceed the FDIC insurance limit. These large banks only offer FDIC insurance. Many community banks offer supplemental insurance plans so that every deposit, every dollar on deposit is insured up to, there is no limit. There are different organizations. One is DIF, Depositors Insurance Fund. Another is SIF. But the point is that this money doesn't belong to the bank. It belongs to all of us. We're taxpayers. And I think we should demand that our money, when deposited at a bank, should be fully insured. And right now, it's not. Secondly, historically, because community banks haven't been very aggressive, they didn't think that they were in the municipal banking business, so they didn't go after these deposits. But this represents an enormous opportunity, as you just heard, for community banks to increase their deposits. The municipal deposits are enormous. And when you think of all the towns and all the counties and all the states that have the money, it's absolutely significant. But Thomas, I applaud you for your efforts. That is wildly impressive, that story that you just told.
Thank you.
I guess I would share one quick story. I live outside of Boston, and probably because they couldn't find another speaker, every year I was asked to speak to the local chamber, and there were typically 300 or 400 people at these meetings. And one year I asked how many people in the room, may I see a show of hands for all the people in the room that bank local, that shop local, and everyone's hand was raised, as you might imagine. Then I said, well, how many of you who purport to shop local bank local? And about a third of the hands in the room went up. And I didn't say anything for the longest period of time. I think people thought I was having a stroke. But I was trying to make a point in how can you possibly shop local and not bank local? How can you possibly do that? You don't shop local if you bank at Chase. So the opportunity to partner with chambers and other organizations to get this message out there, we all have a choice to make about where we can bank. And if you need international overnight currency swap products, then have a great time at Chase. But if you need normal banking products and you believe in shopping local and you believe that having an engaged community bank benefits your community, it takes about 10 minutes to open a bank account. And I think we all have an opportunity to talk about that with people that we come in contact with.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you very much, Thomas, for sharing your thoughts, analysis, and what's going on. And like I said, everyone, Thomas is also a member of our board of directors. Eric Morse has spoken at previous Amoeba conferences. And so we take it very seriously when we speak about local economies. And part of that is having the flow of the dollar circulate within the community multiple times. And I could say, as a previous commercial and small business banker at Chase, I can tell you that 90% of the loans that we made before the economic downturn of 2009 all defaulted. And most of those loans were sold to Countrywide anyway, because a lot of business owners who were making loans were putting second mortgages on their homes. At JP Morgan, we sold those loans directly to Countrywide, and they got put into credit swaps, which is a whole different story. But we take very seriously when it comes to banking and shopping local, and Amoeba has been on the forefront and has helped keep these terms local first very prevalent across the United States. And so I wanted to, I'm looking in the chat box. I see a lot of, well, mainly questions. I think those are from Della. But before we get into the chat box real quick, we got about another 20 minutes. Would anybody like to make a comment talking about maybe what you've learned or what you've heard? Maybe you have a question, maybe you have some anxiety you're feeling, maybe you have a story. And I think we have time for a couple of comments in that area if anybody wants to speak up.
I do.
Rebecca, go ahead and I guess reintroduce yourself again, just who you are and where and what organization.
Rebecca Melançon. I'm in Austin, Texas, and I'm on the board of Amoeba. When I was with AIBA, which I've left here in Austin, recently I interviewed 30 different business owners about how they were doing, about their experiences. Did they apply for PPP or anything through SBA, and all those sorts of questions. It was fascinating to me that in 30 people, one got a loan through Chase Bank. All the others, it's not just that they didn't get loans through the big banks, it's that every single one of them had a horror story of being used and abused by the big banks. They were led on for weeks saying, you're in the queue, this is great, and then all of a sudden dumped. And it was every single time, it was a local community bank that came to the rescue, turned those loans in sometimes 3 days, and took care of them. But in terms of educating people, it isn't, or getting people to change their banking. One, it's an education. You know, we all spent years educating people about shopping locally and why it was important. And now we need to spend years, you know, just like Thomas has as a perfect example, talking about and educating people as to why banking local is important. Because the general public and even business owners don't see bank local as shop local. You know, we haven't nationally done enough to make that connection. And while we're moving businesses, we need to move consumers too. So I think just a lot of education and a great shop local campaign helps a whole lot. And one of the questions I have, and maybe Thomas, maybe you have an answer to this. I know here in Austin, we have 32 credit unions and probably about another 5 or 6 community banks. The credit unions in particular are not really set up for commercial accounts. Like they take them, they're really focused on individual consumers. So they do home loans and car loans and things like that. They will loan, if somebody's a customer, they will do small business loans. But a lot of the services that small businesses may need, they're not really set up to handle very well. And is there something on the horizon, or should we also be talking about educating some of those credit unions to say, you know, we're about to send you this, hopefully, tidal wave of business from small business, but you need to step up your services just a little bit to accommodate them. Do you have anything y'all have done there?
Yeah, so I think part of it is just recognizing the reality of the needs that businesses have to operate a business. We can't expect a business who has certain rates on a loan and or services through potentially a large bank to downgrade, if you will, to go and move their money to a local bank or credit union. Just speaking realistically, that's not something that most people would do with their business. So I think the hard work comes in to building strong relationships with the banks so that you can bring up those concerns and or direct feedback that the business community is giving. So that, I mean, it's almost like you're trying to help them, right? Through knowing what the small businesses are needing in order to move their accounts over and acting as a part of their team. So what we do is we actually keep a running spreadsheet of all the banks and credit unions who do offer business services, what type of loans they provide, any rates that they have publicized, and then anything unique about them. Some banks offer paying invoices or accepting payments through a Zelle. Some don't. And a lot of small businesses need that. So if we can act as a middle point in helping communicate between the small businesses and the banks in order to drive more deposits, that's really a critical piece that community organizations need to play because they don't speak the same language the majority of the time.
Right, right. And how is that message welcomed from the banking side? I mean, is it, are they open to changing? Are they open to expanding maybe just a little bit? It's not a huge expansion because most small business doesn't need complicated banking services. I know that I moved to AIBA's banking from a credit union because I couldn't get credit cards for staff from them. But I was able to find that service through another community bank. And it's little things like that you think this is not a complicated or sophisticated or outrageous request. So do the banks receive that message from you in a welcome fashion?
Yes and no. Depends on how easy it would be to adopt a certain thing or to transition to be able to offer it. And then how much feedback we're getting that is an actual issue. So if you can document, if you can get surveys about what businesses are needing through a banking relationship and then communicate that over, then you can raise awareness enough for the bank to really sit up in their seats and start to look at some of those things. So that's something we're always looking at. We're always having a conversation about. And so we have been able to have some progress. But I think it's also important to note the major difference between a credit union and a bank. They're just very different institutions. While they may sometimes be viewed the same way, most of the time a local bank is going to be set up to service a small business rather than a credit union. Some credit unions do. And so it's important to note what types of services they offer, what types of loans they have, so that the business doesn't get led into a relationship where then they don't have access to something down the road. So it's really important to document that and make sure they're aware of it.
Right, right.
Ibo, did you have your hand up, or did you have a comment that you wanted to make as well?
Yeah, I did want to just
Did
say
I
one
get your
thing.
name correct?
Ebo is the way
Ebo,
to say it.
sorry.
It's all right. I wrote the name of a book in the chat box, which is called Organized Money. And it's a book that really does address the concern that we're talking about here, the fact that large banks have servicing ability that small banks don't. And I have no personal experience in these matters except with there's a food co-op in Philadelphia that's mentioned in that book. And I've spoken to them about expanding on one of the small things that was suggested in that book. And it was very hard for them to hear the suggestion. So the problem, I guess I don't have anything more to say than that I understand that the problem is very real. And that's a book that I think is very valuable in terms of identifying that problem, in terms of contextualizing it in the economy, and then talking about some possible solutions. So I just want to recommend that to everyone because I think it's very much on the point. It's called Organized Money.
Eric, may I add one thing? Sure. There's a good reason, unfortunately, why there are fewer community banks in the United States every year. Some of them are just so depressed and downbeaten that they're just holding on for another year. I mean, there are community banks in the United States that don't make $1 million at the end of the year, and but because they're not publicly traded, there's no shareholder pressure for them to sell the bank or merge with another bank. So they can hold on for another year. All the directors get paid, all the employees get paid. They can have their annual golf tournament or whatever the hell they do. I'm not so naive as to think that every community bank has its A game. Sadly, they don't. Within the world of banking, there's something called the ABA, the American Bankers Association. And your dues are set with the ABA based on your asset size. So again, you know, Chase and Bank of America have their ear. They don't really, unfortunately, care about community banks. And if you go down to the next level, to the state banking associations, more often than not, dues are set the same way by asset size. So you can imagine that the same situation exists there. It's really because there is no banking group lobbying for community banks. When you hear stories like the one Thomas shared with us, we've got to do this ourselves in order to make it happen. You've got to have a partnership with these banks. The 20 banks that I help here in New England, when I first started doing this, there were other banks that wanted to sign on. Their products were so terrible or so lacking that I really couldn't take them on as a client. I couldn't in good conscience suggest that someone open an account there. So I'm just being honest. There are some banks that just don't get it. However, every bank wants to get it. They're just scared. When you meet with the CEO of a community bank and you say, look, we have a very powerful community organization here, and we represent X number of consumers and X number of small businesses, we would really like to direct our business to you but you've got to be able to offer business loans or a business checking account or credit cards or whatever it is. You can pose a very compelling argument with these bankers to make a relatively small investment in a new product or service to gain market share. Because without increased market share, this is a dying breed, unfortunately.
Thank you, Eric. Is there anybody in the group? We got about 5 minutes left, so we're gonna start closing out here. But is there anybody in the group that has any comments or any questions?
I think maybe it's helpful, or we can see if anybody else has questions, but I think, I'm most interested anyway in like the logistics of, starting a bank local campaign and kind of, Thomas, did you organize your community banks together, or did you just kind of start doing that on your own? Was it funded by the community banks? What are the actions that we can take after this call?
Yeah, I'd start by doing your research, making sure you know all of the local banks and credit unions in your region that you represent, and start creating an outlet for people to get connected to them. That includes building a relationship with them, so reaching out to them and seeing how they'd want to partner with you on a campaign. Who is the point of contact at the bank that you're going to need to list their phone number on your landing page for, so that businesses can reach out to them. Maybe creating a form on your website that could be a pledge for individuals to move their money. Because as you all can imagine, moving your money isn't something you can do in 24 hours. You've got to go through and find all of the direct payments that are coming out of your account. You've got to make a list of those. You've got to make a plan. So it's going to be a process if people want to do it. So how can you collect information or get some motivation for people to want to do it, and then guide them through the steps? So a pledge or a form is a great idea. And then start building that contact list of all the banks and credit unions. What do they offer? Are they a bank or a credit union? What's the advantage of banking with them? Who's the contact, etc. And then what we've done at Local First, and I dropped it into the chat box, is we've created our own local banking page on our website that not only just lists the bank information, but tells the bank's story. What are they doing in the community? What is their leadership? Why should I care as a person, right? Like all of us here are super motivated and involved, but what's it going to take to get your average person, your average business to actually care about moving their money? It's going to take some motivation. So tell the story about why the bank is so important to your community. What businesses are they helping? What community nonprofits are they actually giving back to? How are they invested in the community? Show pictures, show stories, help people connect to the face of the business rather than just thinking of it as this financial institution that doesn't matter. You've got to bridge that connection for people. And then from there, I'd think through what media can you get a hold of? Can you write an op-ed in your local newspaper or a resource that's business focused to talk about the importance of community banking? Start gauging and garnering and building more interest from people in doing it. And then the larger piece is having your back end conversations with city governments, counties and or institutions, be it businesses or organizations, about their interest in moving their money, and then tell those stories. We had a nonprofit that had a $3.5 million account in rural Arizona move their money to a local credit union last year. That's a huge, huge story. That's a huge, huge deal for that small town, right? And so you need to collect those stories. You need to do the work on the back ends, as well as getting the word out on the front ends.
And just a quick follow-up question to that. Was that something that you funded just out of your general operating budget, or did you find sponsorship for that from the community banks or from other sources?
Yeah, I built a plan for like your budget for running the campaign. So a lot of the banks and credit unions we partner with at Local First Arizona year round, and we work in promotion for them to our businesses or consumers, depending on how they are structured and who they want to be in front of. And then we create partnerships with them to plug them into this campaign, and then different opportunities that we run throughout the year that are what we call partnerships. And so there are dollar amounts attached to those that help fund our operating costs to do the work. So you can build out budgets for those, or I'd be happy to connect with anybody one-on-one after this on kind of the approach that we take at Local First. And really, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's wrong to think that the banks would not invest in a campaign like this. You know, if you're working, you're essentially on their team, like I said before, to drive more deposits to them, then make it a partnership contract where you can work side by side to accomplish a similar goal.
That sounds great, Thomas. And yeah, like he said, if anybody would like to talk with him one-on-one, we're willing to facilitate or reach out to Thomas directly. We are at 1:59. I think, Jennifer, do you want to close us out? Or
Yeah, I'm going to wrap this up, but I do encourage everyone to reach out to all of us individually. You can connect, Adela can connect you to any one of us. Just reply to the email or however you got the information about today's call. Of course, you know, all of this is facilitated through AMIBA, the American Independent Business Alliance. And, you know, our big strength is that we are an organization of a lot of grassroots other organizations throughout the country. So we have just this kind of really direct communication with the folks right there on the ground where things are happening, and we have a lot of stories to share with each other. That's why we designed these Leaders of Local calls. So thank you to everyone who is an affiliate of AMIBA, and if you are not, I'd ask you to consider becoming one, or becoming a business member as well. There are different ways to be involved and affiliated with AMIBA, depending on what type of organization you are. So we are going to be, you can count on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern. There's going to be something going on with AMIBA. Every other week is this Leaders of Local call where we focus around a particular topic. And then on the other weeks, so next week, June 3rd, we will have kind of an office hours, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name that we settled on that. Bella can pop up with that. Kind of a mutual aid session where we have some experienced leaders of IBAs on the call, and whether you're a small organization, a large organization, you know, anything, you've got a concern, you just want to hear some thoughts about some different things. It's a way to have a powwow with a fellow, a counterpart, a cohort, someone that would understand and that can likely give you some helpful advice. And we also love to hear from you and your story. So that's helpful to us as well. So it's definitely a circle that we engage in here in AMIBA. So I think that was everything I was supposed to cover. Derek, anything last to add, or Della, any housekeeping or anything?
thank you so much, Eric and Thomas.
Yes.
Your insight was great and very well needed. Thank you so much for participating.
Sure.
That's what I was missing. Thank you so much, Derek. And thank you, Derek, too.
Thank you, too. We're all in this together. So.
And Della, and everybody for coming today, too. So
all right.
definitely. And it's great to get to know a lot of folks that I haven't met before. So we'll look forward to next week, and you'll be hearing about our next topic. I don't think that's been determined exactly yet, but we'll be sending that out shortly. So thank you all so much.